This is the full front scale of our skirt, front part, but it's half of the front part. Now I'm going to show you how I was able to arrive at this shape that I got here. Now this is my waist, this is my hip line, that is HL, and this is my knee line. I don't know how you draft your skirt, but obviously this is it, and this is the length of my skirt. This is the length of my skirt. I'm just doing this for the purpose of the training. So now from the waistline, measure down 1 inch. 1 inch from the waistline. Come to the knee line, this knee line, measure up 2 inches or 2.5. 2 inches or 2.5 is okay at that point. Now to get this place, do your hip, that is the new hip you're going to sew for. Minus 10 from it. Whatever you get, divide it by 4. That is what you're going to place from this point to this point. Whatever you get will be what you place from this point to this point. Now by the time you get those points, you connect and connect back. Now for the back, we're going to repeat the same process again. For the back, we're going to repeat the same process, but now the difference is that we are going to be adding 1 inch to that hip. So again, measure down 1 inch from the waistline, measure up 2 inches or 2.5 inches, 2.5 inches or 2 inches from the knee line, and then come to the hip line. Hip line, this HL means hip line. This is the back of the skirt. These are zipper allowance. This is our knee line. So from this, on this hip line, measure your hip minus 10, divide by 4 plus 1, and add it. At the front, we did not add this one. That is the difference. But for the back, we added 1 inch. Let me take it again. Measure 2 inches or 2.5 inches from the knee. Measure down 1 inch from the waist. Here, place your hip, divide minus 10, divide by 4 plus 1 inch, and place the measurements all across. And then the next thing you're going to do is to connect from this point to whatever you got here. Connect from this point to the knee point, and that will be all. The next thing is to cut it out. Now if you notice, you see that I labeled here up and labeled here down. I'm going to specify it as the back, so that when we are cutting on our fabric, we'll know on our foam, we'll know that this is the back piece. So label it down, label up, and then put your back, so that when you're cutting, you will know. Now this is for the front as well. Label this up, label this down, and then identify it as the front skirt, so that when you want to cut it on your foam, you will know which part is front and which part is back. Okay, this is our back. I'm gonna have to cut it out. As you can see, remember we used our new hip to cut this pattern, and I've gone ahead to cut it out on foam. This is for the back. I labeled it so I won't get confused along the side. Back, this is the side. This is the part you're going to fix to the side of the skirt. This is the down part, this is the up part, and this is the zip allowance part, so that I will know how I'll place it on my fabric when I want to sew. This is for the back, this one is for the front. you can see, and I went ahead and labeled as well so that I won't get confused. Now another thing you have to note is that for each of them you cut 2 pieces. I went ahead and cut this one 2 pieces. Please let me do that thing. I cut 2 pieces of this and 2 pieces of the back as well. So after cutting the back and the front, this is what you have. This is the other 2 pieces. Now you're going to go ahead and do something on these ones you cut. If you look closely, you will see something I did here. I don't know if you're seeing it clearly. I went ahead and trimmed the edges of this foam. If you look closely, you see these things here. I trimmed the edge so that it will be flat. I trimmed the edge, and this part I trimmed, you can see the back, the other side is just normal, but I trimmed the other side. Okay, so I went ahead and trimmed the edges. The front, you trim not the side, not the part you put on your skirt. You trim the side that is at the middle part. If you see I trimmed it. Then the back, you not trim it. Look closely, you see how thin it has become. You do the same with the back. The back, you trim the side that is going to the zip allowance. Don't trim the side. Look at it, you see. I don't know if you're seeing it closely. How I did that was that I used my scissors just to be trim the edges, trim it. Just use scissors to trim the edges this way. Okay, that is how you do it. So don't trim too much, just trim it down so it won't be bulky when you fix it on your skirt. Alright, so now you can see how I placed this hip pad. Do whatever you have to do. If you're putting darts across your skirt, put your darts, that's okay. However you do your skirt, remember in this hip pad you're working with only lining, so you're not doing with other parts. Now what you do is you measure 1 inch from the waist to the hip line. Do the same thing here, measure 1 inch down, okay? And then now get your hip pad. Remember that part that we trimmed, remember that is this edge. It's going to be facing down. If you see that there is a label I did here, and I did label here as well. That is the mistake I made. I went and labeled the wrong part. So when you're working with yours, be careful not to do that mistake as well. That is why you need to label. So that part you trimmed is going to face down. So but now if you're placing it, remember this is our seam allowance, okay? But if you're placing it, don't place it exactly on that seam allowance. Leave about ½ inch. Place it like ½ inch, 1 to half or 0.75 inch away. See how I placed it? I did not place it exactly on that seam allowance. Leave like ½ inch, and place it. Then you go to your sewing machine, starting from that 1 inch you marked up there, okay? 1 inch here, ½ inch all the way. So what you're going to do now is you're going to go to your sewing machine and sew this shape around. Okay, this is the back part. So what we are going to do is the same. You are repeating the same process again. So what you do is, remember this is your seam allowance, whatever seam allowance you're doing with your skirt. Measure 1 inch down. If you're adding that to your skirt, add your dart before you do this process. So you're cutting your skirt the normal way, but remember, like I wrote, you're going to cut your skirt with your new hip, the new hip you want to cut, not the old hip. Like if your hip is 46 and you want to make it 50, that is 50, you're going to cut your skirt, then add your seam allowance. So let's assume that this is hip 50 and then I cut hip 50 and added my seam allowance. This is my seam allowance, okay? Now you measure 1 inch down from the waistline and then put your foam. Remember that part that we trimmed, this is the part we trimmed, is still going down, it's still facing the lining, and then you don't place it exactly close to the seam allowance. You see I left about like ½ inch to 0.75 inch. by the side. Okay, starting from that 1 inch, and that's all. So what you're going to do next now is to sew on that foam. You go to your sewing machine, sew around the foam, and that's it. Okay, so after joining it, you see the line I used to join it. This is one part of the back. After joining it, this is what it will look like. This is the other side of the back, and this is the front as well. So once you're done with that, your lining piece is ready, and the next thing is for you to continue with your sewing however you do it. That's all.